Brendon Geils. I did it right. Yes. From Chicago. There's a pig story that we want to hear. This is another podcast that we're going to do here. This is one that I'm really excited about for the AI with Alec community. And there's two reasons why. One, I think what you guys are building is extremely interesting. And I want to ask a bunch of questions, but I do my best not to talk too much. But that being said, there's lots of interesting questions to ask. And two, it's so timely given the fact that everyone seems to be waking up to this notion of the next kind of dimension or phase of enterprise AI that creates real tangible value is in this world of agents, which, without further delay, Brendon Geils, founder, CEO of Athena Intelligence, thank you for being here. Can't wait for you for me to pass the mic to you and let it rip on what it is that you're building and what have you.
Appreciate it, Alec. Really fun to be here. We're building a enterprise analyst, or as we like to say, an AI employee for regulated industries. So most of my background has been selling either data products, data platforms, or the early days of the ML systems to more regulated industries. So we thought that majority of San Francisco would be able to crush the customer support, go-to-market use cases, all the industries that maybe they're more used to. But us out here in New York are going to be solving some of our more regulated industry problem sets.
So you have me at New York, which I get in trouble when I say I'm from there because I'm not actually from there. I'm from just outside of it, but New York is and always will be home. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys moved into a new office and whatnot. So tell me a little bit about where in the city you guys are, and tell me a little bit about finance, of course, because my background, and I'm sure that's part of the reason for the Manhattan footprint, right?
Yeah. So we made the decision kind of year one of the business to pick New York over San Francisco. We're all in person in office crew. We're able to kind of convince a couple San Francisco folks to come out there. That being said, we're a 10-person crew now based in FIDI, day 7 in the office. FIDI.
Nice.
Previously, it's great. It's great. I'm getting used to all the suits walking around, but
you're not a suit guy. It looks like you got a t-shirt on. I like it. Black t-shirt. You got the memo.
Yes. So we just moved down here from Soho, which we miss it, but I think this is the right place for us, given most of our customers today are either law or finance adjacent. Think private equity, banks, large law firms, as well as more boutique law firms. And then we're spreading out more primarily in the Northeast region for other Fortune 500s, such as Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah, I did see that. Let's do a little, give us an example. It doesn't have to be a case study, obviously. Share anything you're comfortable with, but there's a lot of finance in my community. It's the world I grew up in, yada, yada. So I think it would be really cool to hear maybe a use case or two that's specific to the financial services vertical, just to get people's head wrapped around what you guys have built and the opportunity.
Yeah. I'll share one that's a little bit more off-center, because I think our company does phenomenal under different market conditions. There's a number of vertical AI agents or vertical AI companies that are serving finance, law, healthcare, defense, intelligence, insurance. We're a horizontal play. So you might ask, why would you ever pick us over a vertical player? And our belief is that some of the more hard problems and more interesting problems, typically the most valuable ones, don't have a mold that you can take off the shelf. So you actually need these either systems or people, or in our case, it's an AI agent, which can traverse different types of data, different types of market conditions, different types of workflows that you couldn't know ahead of time. So long-winded answer, the workflow that comes to mind is actually tariffs. So what we saw across almost all of our customers is this sense of trying to understand what is the impact of tariffs on either their business directly, or in many cases, our customers work directly with a company, so on the companies that they work with. So for a large organization, the CFO is getting asked by the board, what is tariffs going to do to your business? Think a large Fortune 5, or for our private equity customers, for their clients in their portfolio. What we did for these groups was sit down with each of them, try to understand where are the market signals for them to understand what the actual impact of this tariff changes were. And then as on the typically daily basis, there would be changes in the market. How do you update your model, your belief, your dashboard, your operating mode in order to supply some decision support to leadership? I think that one's like more tangible just because it's more recent. Outside of that, we're doing all of your classic data processing, data analysis, deep research workflows. But I think we shine best when there's some brand new thing that hits someone's desk and there's not an off-the-shelf solution for it.
It makes a ton of sense. And one of the things, and I had it in the notes somewhere, and it was off of your website, so I'm sure you got it, point blank. But I was fascinated by some of the language around the data sets that you make available, to your clients, and the way that it's unified. And I think Snowflake was in there in particular, which I'm obviously biased. I really enjoy Snowflake and what Sridhar is building. So I wonder, could you help, and this is maybe for the more technical side of the audience, but I'd love to hear a little bit more, if you're comfortable sharing, just around the types of data sets that you unify and the implications for that, especially in light of reacting to real-time stuff, such as a tariff change, which tends to be in the news kind of like every day.
Yep. Yeah. So I think if you step back and ask the question, what makes a really great technical employee, they would be able to operate a small CSV, Excel document, a 500-page PDF, a 2-hour audio transcript, and then what you're discussing is the traditional data stores, your BI systems, your Apache Iceberg, S3 instance, your Snowflake, the 10,000 tables on your Databricks. What we found is any one business workflow typically is touching both systems at the same time. So I think historically people have bought data processing pipelines, and separately they bought traditional BI tools which work on top of structured data. And then a human sits down and reasons across these two data sets. They'll get an email with some text and an audio file. They'll think, they'll write a SQL query, they'll go out and procure something on the internet. Our agent is effectively operating in those same capacities on more unstructured data, on the internet or internal data sources, or on your traditional BI systems. To kind of maybe dig in a bit more on the BI approach, because these things are probably a bit more capable than a single analyst, you're actually able to remove a lot of the downstream tooling or pipelining that you historically had to do. And you could connect to a raw data store, event level data, come up with a query at runtime, iterate through that query completely in the backend, and then come up with a reasonable approach to query either a non-traditional BI system next, and then go back to that BI system for further querying. And what that allows us to do is kind of remove the 12 steps you had, which is typically a data engineer, a person who's managing the dashboards. There's like 10 teams that are just democratizing data. And what I think people have found at the enterprise is it never got democratized. It just kind of became someone else's problem to answer another dashboarding question. We feel that this actually does provide some layer of democratization, even though you're still going to an agent, not a human.
It's awesome. Yeah, where that takes me, again, not to move around too much, but I always use the same research and stats when one hits me really hard. And one of them was relatively recently, McKinsey, and I think it was BCG, effectively said that 1% to 4% only of enterprises are using their criteria, AI mature. And so that leaves a pretty massive percent that aren't. And saying the quiet part out loud, which, I can say it, I guess, there are a lot of people within the enterprise, C-suite and one or two clicks below that are not comfortable with their lack of understanding of all of the moving parts and just how fast things are going. And I'm so curious from your perspective, especially given your background as well, which you're more than welcome to share any of that as well. How are you feeling about the way that you all are understood by enterprises that you're initially starting to talk to versus once they become clients, how that kind of relationship evolves and how much easier, or maybe there's some unforeseen obstacles that get in the way as you operationalize. But I think the audience would love to hear how well understood and what has your experience been when you're going to market and you're trying to help navigate technical and or non-technical hurdles within the enterprise, given how fast things are moving?
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I think, one of the hardest things. And to your point, it's not technical. To kind of spread a bit of light on my background, which is probably the reason why we operate this way. I was with Palantir for 4 years on their defense and intelligence business in the Middle East, as well as in DC, where I held TS clearance with them. Did similar work for Scale AI, and then early days before that was with SpaceX. What I found, I think, was most of the time the technology wasn't the rate limiter for a successful pilot, either at Scale or at Palantir. It was your ability to introduce change management to an organization. So what does that mean in practice for us? We're a top-down sale. We only work with legitimized regulated industries because we believe that we want our brand to reflect the security and sensitivity of some of the most important institutions. So we've had to say no to a lot of great deals that we felt didn't fit our brand profile and our focus. And then we've invested early on in private cloud deployments, on-prem deployments. We have a customer today deployed on AWS GovCloud, ones that are currently in air-gapped networks where we don't even have the ability to touch anything. And I don't think this is like a thing that you should take lightly if you're starting a company to do it in this manner. But I think for us, it was something we knew we always wanted to sell in this space. And we weren't going to cut corners in the beginning in order to make that possible. Yeah.
That's excellent. And I wondered, I didn't realize the SpaceX bit, but wow, it's a heck of a background. Any interesting, kind of stories of lessons that you learned along the way in those extraordinary organizations that eventually led to you, becoming the founder and CEO of Athena Intelligence? Like, what was the origin story? It's a kind of a backwards way of asking, what's the origin story? Because I don't know it.
Yeah. I think the thing that maybe most stood out across all of the companies that I've had the opportunity to work at is, one, they're backed by Peter Thiel. I'm just kidding. That was a later insight that we had, which I was like, it's funny how that worked. Maybe we're just a plant. No, it was.
Guy's really smart,
Yeah, something like that. I think it was that no one ever told us we couldn't do it. I think like SpaceX, it's very understood why that might be the case. Palantir, you could have a 23-year-old graduate and then go tell a foreign government how they need to reorg. Or example that I like to give during my days at Palantir is COVID-19 hit, and there was 20 of us that flew into DC and basically were hands-on keyboard in person for the first 9 months of the pandemic, where none of us had healthcare backgrounds. None of us had backgrounds to understand the types of problems we were working on. But what we were able to do was integrate 4,000 data feeds from different hospitals in a short period and allow the government to make decisions from there. And I think like the string that ties all these companies together, and probably some of the impetus for why we're a horizontal company selling into regulated industries, is because I just haven't ever been told you can't do it. And those problems are exciting.
Without a doubt. And is that something that, not to get into childhood stuff, but like, have you always been kind of wired that way? As like, oh, I can't, like you like to overcome the challenge, or becoming an entrepreneur, was that something you always had dreamed of, or, it just kind of happened along the way?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I struggled to be able to know why I started this or why I didn't join a similar company. Growing up, we grew up in the Chicago suburbs, school out in Iowa State. I wasn't around people that had a similar style of work, focused on electrical engineering in college, had a bit of work in the ML space. So I think I just didn't have groups or peers around me that had already dictated a roadmap. So it was very simple for me to just work on what I thought was interesting, useful, and it ended up being these companies, and this is where we ended up. I think if I would have gone to a different school, I would have been told, Palantir, you can't go there. It has an ethos of work. I probably would have been told not to join or start my own thing, but because I think I lived outside the ecosystem long enough that it didn't make sense not to, and that's where I came to.
So interesting, for sure. And I think one of the things I meant to ask earlier on the front end with the 10-person team, what are your thoughts on on the way you think about scaling, and you don't have to answer the question with in any way obviously you can answer however you want to, but I think there's a lot of fascination, I guess is the way to context the question. There's a lot of fascination around these companies that are being built with a lot less people than companies that perhaps had been built previously, in large part because of the AI tools and so on and so forth and technologies. But when you think about scaling and growth, how do you think about the relationship between how many people you think you might need to get to where you want to go? Or are you just kind of like, yeah, I don't really think that way. I don't really think about it. I'm just doing what I'm doing,
Yeah. No, I think this is a really interesting question. One, we do have a ton of people we work with. 10 of them are full-time in person in New York. And what I'll say is, I'll actually leak one of our like huge hacks, because I think we're probably not going to use it anymore, which is I call it the YC incubator. And it goes like this. Every batch, there is a group of people that are super smart, super vetted. They have you understand their motivations, and it's one thing to have a demo day that looks awesome. They have some revenue spike. They have an investor who can call one customer and have a great conversation. So what we did in the early days when we were like, how do we hire talent? How do we build the product? Was we would call about 15 to 20 YC companies, be a design partner to them. We'd pay them small sums of money, and we'd be their best demo day phone call. 3 years later, I think on every demo day, we're about 5 people's like customer logo deck. It's like,
I might have seen 1 or 2 of those, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. Is that a pattern?
Yeah. And like we're at the point now where if we can't find a company on the deck, on like the YC batch, we will call one up that looks similar, and we're like, I know your idea is great, but what if you took a slight off ramp? And to be honest, I think they love it. Like they're in many times really brilliant people that don't have a problem to work on because maybe they haven't been in the workforce long enough. And I think like we provide a service to them, which is, we call it, providing them a use case for their what's the weather in San Francisco ML application. And I'm being a bit facetious, but
I was like, what? I think I know what that means.
Yeah. It's a great funnel for us to like test out new product ideas. And we have some of our best partners that we work with to this day from that program. And then just one quick point on our team, it is better to be small in this business, I think. I think you scale by staying small, and you scale in other ways by building agents to do the job that maybe historically you would have to hire people for. Because for this thing to work well, it's got to live in less people's heads. The more heads you live in, the more it becomes a Google PM'd project, a Microsoft PM'd project. So I think for us, we have to stay small as long as we can.
I can guarantee that quote right there is going to go in the micro essay to promote this episode. That was killer. Let me ask a probing, like a double click into that question and that answer. I hear you, but the one thing I'm always curious about, especially when you're operating at the enterprise level, is how do you envision and how do you think about the human layer that's required, whether it be the change management bit, people have different terms for this, not customer success per se. I'm trying to remember the name, forward deployed engineer, I believe it is at Palantir. I'm sure you're going to correct me because I'm off on that, but as you should. But how do you think about the whatever you want to call the human role, to the extent that it's required, that interfaces with an enterprise around the introduction and deployment and operationalizing Athena Intelligence within the context of that growth statement?
Yeah. So to your exact point, we have a role called forward deployed engineering. And it's similar to Palantir's, but it's slightly different as well. It's similar in that you called out, you have to typically do a face-to-face, convince them through building a relationship that you're a trustworthy organization to hand over some amount of data or some amount of access, or even to help out and justify like, hey, you're going to invest a pretty good sum of money into the next 2 years partnering with us to go on this journey. So having FDE, specifically forward deployed engineer, in that role is kind of key in one. 2, historically, Palantir and us have had to also mend the edges of our products in the early days, so that way they actually work for our customers. That's becoming less and less. And I think the areas where we're now starting to differ from maybe the traditional FDE model that I experienced is that our FDEs, one of their job descriptions and pillars of their job is they have to build a carbon copy of themselves in the product for the customer. Yeah.
Ooh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Yeah.
So, if you can,
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I think if you think of Athena as this esoteric agent, our company in practice develops a bunch of these agents. Mm-hmm. Some of them are like a personal assistant. Others are a brand new role. Others are, in this case, a carbon copy of the FDE. And the FDE in post-sales, after we've sold into account, has a couple functions. One, we fly in person. We just got back from Dallas yesterday. We did Baltimore, LA, Anheuser-Busch out in Belgium. We fly anywhere our customers are at. Once they do that face-to-face with a human and we've built that trust, what our job is, the FDE's job is to actually build different agentic functions into what they would previously have to do. So the first one that's super easy to understand is a knowledge capture of someone's workflow. If I sit with, let's say, the CFO's team, and they have a three-way matching problem with purchase orders. How do we match purchase orders most effectively? I would sit there as a FDE and I would just ask questions for an hour. We have built systems to effectively attend video calls, record as a notebook or as a note taker, and then we also have the functionality to ask questions in those calls. And you can imagine the next 3 to 5 steps are: we take the video recordings, we parse those into workflows. Those workflows are then in our system as a first draft copy of what the FDE is effectively tasked with doing, which is how do you turn on an enterprise after you've built that trust and data access. You have to get access to workflows and you have to drive adoption. Those are great items for us to integrate directly into agents, and that's what our team is building.
That is gnarly. Let me ask a silly question. Does that then become a pattern that they consider replicating in different, is that kind of maybe that's not quote unquote the business, but you know what I mean? Because like if I saw someone do that, my immediate direction I would jump to is how do we replicate that, across the business in different ways where it's best that Athena Intelligence agents, et cetera, can take care of those types of things so we can shift our resources focusing on the things that, maybe the humans are a little bit better at,
Yeah. Yeah, we heard this phrase knowledge transfer at a big 3 consulting firm, at a big 4 accounting firm in the last 2 weeks, which is kind of a version of what I just described, which is, hey, as you roll off an account, which is typical of both consulting and audit, how do we do a knowledge transfer so that way we don't lose sight of this engagement for next year? That's a classic example of you want someone to basically sit down and interview this person before they roll off into a new project. And we, unbeknownst to us, kind of built the primitives for them to do that. Jeez. And now that's part of the offering.
That is awesome. Last question. I know we got to keep each other honest here on time. So you can go anywhere you want with this question too, but your vision for knowledge work, if you had to kind of just encapsulate it in a short little annoying podcast question. And what I mean by that, I'll put a little constraint around it. In the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, there are some people that think that there needs to be kind of a reorientation of many established businesses around what can now be done with enterprise AI in particular, and what are the implications for the way knowledge work is going to be done in the future, the collaboration between human beings and agents and autonomous work. And like, I know it's like a word salad question, but just for given everything you've just shared and the space you're in and what you just said in particular about that spinning up the replicating that person, when someone asks you like, hey, Brendon, where's it going in the next 6, 12, 18 months, knowledge work, and what should people be thinking about and running towards versus whatever? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll answer both from the human's perspective and the agent's perspective, because I think they're both exciting. In that 6 months, operational heavy work for knowledge workers should go away. And this is like your boring task of every day you log into the inbox and you check all those Jira tickets or the emails or like whatever the operational heavy workflow is, a good 80 to 90% of that should be just a rote agentic task. That's exciting for us because that's a huge business driver of value in dollars. It's exciting for a lot of the teams we work with because that's their least favorite part of their job is the rote, repeatable nature of their job. In 12 months, I think a lot of what we're expecting the agents to be able to do is a lot more expansive. So I think this changes the opportunity from this is just a personal assistant next to every single analyst that we work with to these things are operating as kind of their own beings. So you're calling it Athena, you call it her, she's got a phone number, she's got an email address. You actually have like a near relationship with this entity, not just as like a assistant to your work, but also as its own piece of work. And then what I think that allows us to do is truly let people work on the more creative and the more people-facing roles. So creativity is kind of a holy grail problem still in AI. They're not creative yet. They basically show some interpolations of creativity, but people are still the most creative problem solvers. And we're basically unlocking a lot of individuals to go work on that, as well as be more customer facing. Even if you have the best AI voice, I don't want to talk to an AI in a lot of different parts of my job. So being able to let people do what they're best at, which is emotional connections and also the creativity. 18 months, who knows? I think we are honest enough to ourselves to say, I have no idea, but we're gonna figure it out along the way.
Well, this is awesome, and I love that answer, and I was waiting for it, right? Because how could you possibly predict that far out? It's why I only went to 18. I wasn't going to 24, 36, yada yada. But
Yeah.
in any case, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience before we wrap things up here, Brendon? And thank you again, as always, for joining here.
Yeah, we're hiring like crazy. If you like hard problems, fun in-person culture, come apply for forward deployed product engineers and platform engineers.
Love it. And where should people find you?
You can find us on LinkedIn's probably easiest, Athena Intelligence, or you can find me on Twitter, Brendon Geils.
Excellent. I'm going to put all that in the notes. And Brendon, thank you so much. And I love what you guys are building, and we'll check in another time very soon.
Great. Thanks, Alex.
See you, man.